Hello everybody. Let's continue our study. Today we'll talk about the title, author, commentator, and translator of the Mula Madhyamaka Kalika. We will now formally begin our study of the Mula Madhyamaka Kalika. First, everyone should already have received the textbook. We will begin with the title of the treatise. In the Sanskrit title printed at the beginning of the textbook, the first word written in Devanagari script is Mula. It is pronounced Mula. The basic meaning of Mula is root. As in the root of the tree, in philosophical words and Buddhist scriptures, it is often translated in a more theoretical sense as fundamental. The second word is Madhyamaka. The word derived from Madhya, whose base meaning is middle or being in the middle. In a Buddhist context, it is generally rendered in Chinese as Zhongguan or Madhyamaka. Thus, the most basic Sanskrit expression corresponding to Zhongguan in such terms as the Madhyamaka school and the Madhyamaka view is Madhyamaka. The third word is Kalika. Kalika is generally translated as verse, meaning a verse in metrical form. It is also sometimes translated as root verse. Therefore, according to the extant Sanskrit version, the complete title of this treatise is Mula Madhyamaka Kalika. If translated as strictly and literally from the Sanskrit, the title would be Root Verse on Madhyamaka. In Chinese Buddhism, however, we usually call it the Zhonglun, treatise on the middle, as the中论颂, verse of the treatise on the middle. This raises a question: why does the Chinese title contain the additional word lun, meaning treatise? In the extended Sanskrit title, the word sastra, which would correspond to lun, does not appear. In other words, treatise is not directly presented in the original title. Why then does Chinese Buddhism nevertheless call this work the Zhonglun? We will discuss this question in detail shortly. This is the first part, an explanation of the title of the treatise. We now turn to the second part, the author of this treatise. The author of the Mula Madhyamaka Kalika is the renowned Nagarjuna. The name Nagarjuna is actually composed of two words, Naga and Arjuna. The literal meaning of Naga was originally snake. In Chinese culture, however, people often refer to a snake as a little dragon. So ancient translators generally rendered Naga as dragon. Arjuna is more complex. In Indian literature, it is often transliterated into Chinese as Arjuna. Those familiar with India's two great epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, will know that Arjuna is an exceptionally violent hero. The word Arjuna itself, however, was originally the name of a type of tree. Kumarajiva therefore translated it as tree. The name Nagarjuna was rendered in Chinese as Longsu, meaning dragon tree. Of course, because Arjuna also carries the connotation of a violent hero in Indian culture, later translators sometimes rendered Nagarjuna as Longmen, meaning dragon hero. Thus, when the names Longsu or Longmen appeared in Buddhist literature, they both refer to the same person. In this lecture series, however, we will constantly use the Chinese name Longsu for Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna is the author of the root verse on Madhyamaka. When then did Nagarjuna live? The question is not easy to answer. Traditional Indian culture did not place great importance on historical chronology, so the history of ancient India is often rather confused. Modern scholars have undertaken extensive and painstaking research into the states of Nagarjuna's birth and death. But even today, no completely unified conclusion has been reached. At present, most scholars tend to believe that Nagarjuna lived approximately between 150 and 250 CE. In other words, he lived roughly from the late half and the 2nd century to the first half of the 3rd century CE. These days alone may not give anyone an intuitive sense of the period. We may therefore compare them with Chinese history. The Eastern Han dynasty lasted approximately from 25 to 220 CE, while the Three Kingdoms period lasted from 220 to 280 CE. With this comparison, the chronology becomes easier to understand. Nagarjuna was active approximately from the final years of the Eastern Han dynasty through the Three Kingdom period. In other words, Nagarjuna composed the Mula Madhyamaka Karika at roughly the same time that figures such as Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Sun Quan, and Zhuge Liang were active. Nagarjuna may, of course, have been somewhat older than they were, but broadly speaking, the belonged to the same historical period. The comparison gives us a clear sense of his time. From our present perspective, Nagarjuna lived roughly 1,700 or 1,800 years ago. We now turn to the third part, the commentator on the Zhonglun. It is important to note that the first person to translate the Zhonglun into Chinese was the renowned Gumalajiva. Gumalajiva, however, translated more than Nagarjuna's 450 verses. At the same time that he translated the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, he also translated a commentary on it. The author of this commentary was called Qingmu. Why did Gumalajiva translate the commentary together with the verse? Indian Buddhist texts, whether sastras or sastalas, were often composed in metrical verse, primarily to facilitate memorization and recitation, rather than to be read directly. Generally speaking, a verse consists of 4 lines with 8 syllables in each line for a total of 32 syllables. To satisfy this strict metrical structure, the language necessarily becomes extremely concise. Consequently, many words were omitted from a verse, leaving only the essential clues. For this very reason, that if we have only Nagarjuna's 450 verses without the commentaries of later scholars, it would often be difficult to understand them properly, even if we were reading the original Sanskrit today. The Mula Madhyamaka Karika must therefore be approached through its commentarial tradition. Thus, when Gumalajiva translated Nagarjuna's verse, he also translated Qingmu's commentary. Because of the lack of Indian historical materials, it is likewise difficult to determine with certainty who Qingmu was. Within Chinese Buddhism, however, a relatively complete account of the Nine Age has long been transmitted. According to this traditional account, Nagarjuna has a renowned disciple named Alayadeva. Alayadeva had a disciple named Rahulata. Rahulata in turn has a disciple named Qingmu. In the traditional of Chinese Buddhism, therefore, Qingmu is regarded as the third generation successor after Nagarjuna, who, when come after Qingmu, according to tradition, it was Surayasoma, who was also known as the Prince of Shastra. the disciple of the prince of Shastra was Gurumarajiva. The entire lineage is thus very clear. Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Rahulata, Chimbu, Sharvasoma, Gurumarajiva. From the traditional perspective of Chinese Buddhism, Gurumarajiva was therefore Chimbu's grand disciple. Thus, when Gurumarajiva translated Nagarjuna's 440 verse, he also translated the commentary written by the teacher of his own teacher. This also explains why Chinese Buddhism usually call the word of Zhonglun. The title Zhonglun does not refer solely to Nagarjuna's 440 verse. Rather, it refers to Nagarjuna's root verse together with Chimbu's commentary, collectively known as the Zhonglun. Everyone should therefore pay particular attention to the following point. Strictly speaking, this lecture series will not explain the entire Zhonglun 9 by 9. Instead, it will focus on Nagarjuna's 440 verses. During the explanations, I will certainly consult Chimbu's commentary as well as commentaries from other traditions. But we will not explain Chimbu's commentary itself 9 by 9. The more accurate description of this lecture series is therefore lectures on the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. The specific inclusion of the word verse in the Chinese title indicates that our focus is Nagarjuna's 440 root verses. We now come to the fourth part, a brief introduction to the translator Gurumarajiva. Gurumarajiva's Sanskrit name is Gurumarajiva. In this name, Gurumara means boy or young. Jiva means life or long life. Therefore, Jiumolosi, the Chinese form of Gurumarajiva, is a transliteration. Tongshou means youngful longevity is a translation of its meaning. Gurumarajiva was born around 343 CE and died in 413 CE at approximately 70 years of age. He lived from the middle of the 4th century to the beginning of the 5th century CE. The Zhonglun was translated into Chinese around 409 CE. In other words, Gurumarajiva completed his translation of the Zhonglun later in his life. He died 4 years after completing the translation. From 409 CE to the present, this Chinese translation of the Zhonglun was circulated for more than 1,600 years. These then are the 4 basic points introduced today concerning the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. First, the title of the treatise. Second, the author, Nagarjuna. Third, the commentator, Chinmu. Fourth, the translator, Gumalajiva. With this basic groundwork complete, we can proceed to the text of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika itself. Now we formally begin our study of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. The Mula Madhyamaka Karika is divided into 27 chapters. We will now begin our study of the first chapter. Please turn to page 11 of the main text. A special reminder here, this is page 11 without penalties, meaning page 11 after the main text formally begins, not the page numbers in penalties in the preceding preface and introductory sections. For this page onward, the main text of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika formally begins. Let us first look at the title of the first chapter. The Sanskrit title of the first chapter is Pratyaya Paliksa Lama Palathamam Palakalalam. Let us look at it word by word. The first word is Pratyaya. For a long time, students of Jimin Jinse, this word should already be very familiar. Pratyaya means condition. Buddhism often says that all dharmas arise through causes and conditions, and one of the most standard and common Sanskrit terms for condition is pratyaya. The second word is paliksa. Paliksa is feminine now. In Asian translations, the word was rendered in many different ways, such as understanding, reflection, and discernment, distinguishing, and observation. Gumalajiva rendered it as observation. The modern scholar Ye Shaorong rendered it as examination. So, pariksha can generally be understood as observation, examination, reflection, and discernment, distinctions, and understanding. In other words, it means conducting an in-depth analysis and examination of a particular object. So what is being examined? Conditions. Therefore, pratyaya pariksha literally means an examination of conditions, an observation of conditions, and analysis of the conditions for dependent origination. Gumalajiva therefore rendered it as observation of cause and conditions. Strictly speaking, however, the word cause does not necessarily need to be added here, because Pratiyaya itself learns more towards the meaning of condition. So it can also simply be translated as observation of conditions. Next comes nama. The word should be very easy to recognize. It is extremely similar to the English word name, because both belong to the Indo-European language family. Lama means name, named, called. Then comes Palatama. Palatama means first. The final word is Palagalaskanana. In Asian translations, this word was usually rendered as a chapter, though it was also translated as section or part. Therefore, Pratiyaya, Paliksha, Lama, Palatamam, Palagalalam can be translated in full as Chapter 1, Observation of Conditions, or Chapter 1, Examination of Conditions. This is the title of the first chapter. Now you can think about a question. Why does the Mula Madhyamagga Karika begin by discussing conditions in its very first chapter? Does that make sense? In fact, it made perfect sense. Because the most fundamental core teaching of Buddhism is dependent origination. When we previously studied the introduction to the Diamond Sutra, we mentioned that the Buddha once referred to himself as one who teaches dependent origination. That is to say, the Buddha taught that the core of all the Dharma he taught ultimately comes down to dependent origination. So dependent origination can also be said to be the central hallmark of Buddhism as a whole. If one talks about Buddhism without discussing dependent origination, or talks about the Dharma without discussing conditions at all, it is difficult to say that one has truly taught upon the fundamental meaning of the Buddhism teachings. In our previous courses, we also briefly summarize the three-period system of teachings established in the Samdhinirmocjana Sutra. The first period teaching focused on the 12 links of dependent origination. The second period teaching focuses on the dependent arising and dependent origination. The third period teaching of focus on dependent origination based on storehouses consciousness. Storehouse is not the word. Storehouse is Anayavijnana. Okay, never mind. In other words, although the three pillars of teaching unfold in different ways, their core always resolved around dependent origination. So you can see that it is no accident that Nagarjuna begins the Mula Madhyamagga Karika by discussing conditions in the first chapter. On the contrary, there is a very strong theoretical necessity to doing so. Since dependent origination is the fundamental teaching of Buddhism, it is an only natural that Nagarjuna, as the founder of the Madhyamaka school, begins by examining whether conditions themselves can be established and exactly how they are established. This is naturally becomes the starting point of the entire system of argumentation. Therefore, beginning the first chapter of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika with an observation of conditions is not only reasonable, it can also be said to provide the foundational entry point for the logical development of the entire Madhyamaka Karika. Okay, that's all today. Let's have a rest.